A third and final round of talks between the United States and China is due to begin within hours. The first sessions have been described as fiery. Despite the sparring, though, there is word of some progress. Live to Olivia Seong and Simon Marks in just a moment for the perspective from Beijing and Washington. But first, a look at what's happened so far.
It was a war of words as China and U.S. officials from the Biden administration met for the first time in Anchorage, Alaska. Expectations were low going into the meeting, but few had expected opening remarks to turn into both sides trading barbs on a range of issues.
We'll also discuss our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies.
关于所谓这个网络袭击问题，我想想，网络袭击的能力使用方面，美国都是冠军。
Mr. Yang also had something to say about the U.S. human rights record.
而美国存在的人权问题是根深蒂固的。 不是过去4年就存在的，对黑人的屠杀早就存在这个问题。
It also denounced sanctions against Chinese officials over Hong Kong issued on the eve of their visit.
但是，竟然在我们出发的前一天，美国发起新的对华制裁，我认为这不是正常的待客之道。
Despite a rocky start, officials reconvened for another session in the evening, one the U.S. described as substantive, serious and direct. They're set to meet again for a third and final session.
Olivia Seong joins us live now from Beijing. Olivia, a very fiery start to the meeting. What kind of message is China sending to the United States?
Well, I think it's quite clear from those opening remarks that China wanted to send a very clear message to the U.S. as well to its domestic audience, given the buzz that has been generated here over this Alaska meeting, that China is not going to back down and it's going to defend its interests very staunchly. And, you know, we had expected these talks to be tough. And going into these meetings, China had been angered by U.S. actions. And this played out in the meeting. At one point, Foreign Minister Wang Yi very pointedly asking the U.S. whether it was intentional that it had imposed sanctions on more Chinese officials over their role in eroding freedoms in Hong Kong. But perhaps these initial remarks were a little bit more contentious and more public than some observers may have imagined. And now, following the close of the first day of talks, we have seen China and the U.S. pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for this very fiery start. We see China's foreign ministry seeming to put the blame on the U.S. and weighing in on the heated exchange. It said that there was a strong smell of, quote, gunpowder and drama from the beginning in the opening remarks. But this was not the original intention, it said, of the Chinese side. And it also said that China did not only feel Alaska's cold weather, but also the cold hospitality by the U.S. And now this also comes as we had seen some drama with the opening remarks. Both sides couldn't seem to agree on when the media should exit the room. Typically, the media is allowed in for a few minutes, but then they were called to stay behind and listen to this heated exchange of words, which went on for more than an hour. The U.S. then accused China of grandstanding and violating protocol, not adhering to the 2 minutes that had been agreed on for the opening remarks. And shortly after that, we saw the Chinese side accuse the U.S. of the same thing, saying that the U.S. instead was the one that had not followed the protocol by exceeding the agreed time, and also saying that the U.S. had made groundless attacks and accusations against China's domestic and foreign policies and had provoked disputes, to which China had to make a solemn response. And in all this, we can see that in spite of talk about wanting to, restore ties to the right track, that these two countries still remain very far apart.
Well, Olivia, we still have another day for this dialogue. Have the talks hit a roadblock because of this? What kind of progress can we expect?
Well, it's really hard to say. The talks will continue tomorrow. China's foreign ministry has said that these opening remarks served as only an appetizer and will be followed by a, quote, dinner, which is the big event, it said, and it did not elaborate further on what exactly it meant by that. But we know that even prior to the start of these meetings, that both sides have downplayed expectations. China saying that was just hoping that this would be a start to a dialogue process. And it has said that it will be stating its position. And we have seen that today, especially as the U.S. has said that it would be raising its concerns over issues like Taiwan, Hong Kong, as well as alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang. We see the Chinese side has already hit back, saying that these were inseparable parts of China and that the U.S. does not represent the rest of the world. China also taking, issue with the U.S. and reports suggesting that tariffs may be on the agenda. China, as we know, Foreign Minister Wang Yi himself has called for the U.S. to roll back on some of the policies that had been implemented under the Trump administration, whether it's tariffs on Chinese goods or sanctions on Chinese companies as well. The question, though, is whether there's even any room, any small room for some sort of cooperation, whether it's in areas like climate change or the global economic recovery.
Olivia, thank you very much for that. Olivia Song there in Beijing.
And for the U.S. perspective, Simon Marks joins us live from Washington, D.C. Simon, the new Biden administration sort of leading this. Did they get what they expected from the Chinese with their response?
Well, I think that's very difficult to know, Steve. I mean, the Americans insisted that this meeting needed to happen on American soil. And what ensued, as Olivia has been describing, is a clash, not just of cultures, but a clash of geopolitical values, with the Chinese officials turning to their American hosts and saying, the United States does not represent international public opinion, and neither does the Western world. That was a very clear attempt to push back the Biden administration's intent to present itself not just as being there in Alaska speaking on behalf of Washington, D.C. and President Joe Biden, but speaking on behalf of allies and partners throughout the region, with whom, of course, Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and others within the Biden administration have been consulting over the past several weeks. So this was China essentially saying to the United States, you don't speak on behalf of the world. And further, the Chinese went on to insist that when the United States emphasizes the importance of a rules-based international system, they view that as the United States trying to set up some kind of competitive straw man to the existing arrangements that are overseen by the United Nations in terms of enforcing the rules of the game internationally. So this was a quite remarkable moment, not just in the history of the U.S. relationship with Beijing, but in the history of America's attempts to cajole and persuade competitors on the world stage to see things its way. And certainly in the public display that we witnessed at the start of those talks in Alaska on Thursday, it was evident that the Chinese fully intend to push back against that, safe in the knowledge that by 2028, economists say they will have the largest economy anywhere in the world and will surpass the United States.
Well, U.S. officials are suggesting that they've made substantial progress. On what grounds would that be?
It's simply unknowable at this point. I think we're not going to know in detail until these talks are over. Take, for example, the issue of tariffs. The Chinese would like to see the Biden administration alleviate some of the tariffs that the Trump presidency put into place against Chinese goods and services. I mean, for the Biden administration, there's a whole new calculation that has to be done about that, because Americans are waking up this morning to turn on their televisions here in the United States, and they are seeing images and sounds of Chinese officials lecturing American officials on the subject of Chinese behavior and America's pushback against it. So that is going to make it, I think, even more complicated for the Biden administration as far as the domestic audience in America is concerned to give very much to the Chinese. As a result of this, US officials have said they do not expect any kind of joint statement to be issued at the end of this meeting. They're also quoted here as saying that this is not the beginning of dialogue with a capital D. So they continue to try and manage expectations coming out of this meeting as to whether there is any kind of concrete achievement beyond some kind of agreement to meet again. I think we're just simply not going to know until all of this wraps up in Alaska.
Hey, May, thanks for getting us up to speed with the Washington perspective. Simon Marks there from the US Capitol.